You know that old playground rhyme? First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby in a baby carriage. Cute, right? Well, my life didn't exactly follow that script. After 3 marriages and 3 divorces, and a long stretch of wondering what was wrong with me, I ended up making the one commitment that finally worked. A commitment that didn't involve a wedding dress, a partner, or anyone else's last name. I married myself, not as a joke, not as a self-care hashtag, but as a real vow. 4 vows, actually, that changed everything about the way I live, love, and even see myself. But before I tell you how I got there, let me tell you how badly the original plan went. Because trust me, it did not go the way that playground rhyme promised. So what do I mean by self-marriage? No, I didn't throw myself a wedding or walk down an aisle alone while my friends politely pretended it wasn't weird. Honestly, that might have been less awkward than a couple of my actual weddings. Self-marriage is much simpler and much deeper. It's making the same commitments to yourself that you'd normally reserve for a spouse. The loyalty, the presence, the I'm with you no matter what vows. It's choosing yourself as the one person you can rely on to show up every single time. It sounded ridiculous even to me at first, like something you'd hear from someone fresh out of a silent retreat with a backpack full of crystals. But after 3 marriages that all fell apart in different ways, I finally saw the pattern. I kept hoping someone else would complete me, fix me, or save me from my own emptiness. And every time, I was disappointed. The realization hit hard and embarrassingly late. The one person I'd never committed to was the person in the mirror. Self-marriage isn't about rejecting relationships. It's about becoming whole enough that when you do let someone into your life, you're not asking them to fill a hole they could never possibly fill. You're bringing a full person to the table instead of a half-formed version of yourself, hoping someone else will supply the missing pieces. And that shift changes everything. Now let's talk about the obvious question. Why should anyone take advice from someone who's been divorced 3 times? Honestly, if I were you, I'd wonder the same thing. If a 3-time divorcee walked up to me and said, "Let me teach you about commitment," I'd check for the nearest exit. But here's what I've learned the hard way. The people who get everything right from the start aren't usually the ones who understand it. The best teachers are the ones who've fallen on their faces, gotten back up, and actually done the work to figure out why they keep tripping. They've lived the consequences. They've earned the insight. If you want to quit smoking, you don't ask someone who never picked up a cigarette. If you want to understand addiction, you don't ask someone who's only ever had 1 drink on New Year's Eve. Wisdom doesn't come from a perfect record. It comes from surviving the mess. So yes, I've failed at marriage 3 times, but each failure forced me to confront patterns I'd been blindly repeating for decades. Each one showed me something about myself I had been refusing to see. And every time I thought I'd hit the bottom, there was another layer I still needed to face. My divorces aren't proof that I know nothing about commitments. They're the reason I finally learned what commitment actually requires. They expose the wounds, the fears, and the habits I kept dragging from relationship to relationship. They're not my disqualifications. They're my credentials. To understand why I kept choosing the wrong relationships, you have to know where it actually began. Not with my first marriage, or my first breakup, but way back in childhood, where most of our deepest patterns quietly form. I grew up in foster care, 24 homes by the time I turned 18, 24 times packing everything I owned into a garbage bag and moving in with strangers. 24 reminders that home was temporary and family could disappear overnight. My biological parents had their own battles: addiction, instability, the kind of chaos that makes the state step in. I don't hold anger toward them anymore, but the impact on a kid who just wanted to belong didn't vanish with time. Lying in bed in those houses, I felt this hollow, half-formed sense of self, like something essential was missing, and I'd spend my life trying to find it. Somewhere in that confusion, I made a vow so quiet, I didn't even know I'd made it. I will never be abandoned again. That vow became the engine behind everything I did. Every relationship, every choice, every frantic effort to make someone stay. If someone showed even a hint of choosing me, I latched on. If they drifted, I twisted myself into whatever shape might keep them from leaving. Being alone felt like danger. Being left felt like death. And that fear, the one carved into me as a child, ended up steering every adult relationship I entered. I didn't know it then, but it was the invisible thread tying all my failures together. Marriage number 1. I was 23, fresh out of college, pretending I knew who I was. He was steady, predictable, and most importantly to me at the time, present. I didn't marry him out of deep, grounded love. I married him because present felt like a miracle to someone terrified of being left. But you can't build a marriage on fear. I needed constant reassurance, constant proof he wouldn't disappear, and eventually the pressure became too much. The thing I feared happened anyway. He left. I decided the problem was that he was too safe, so marriage number 2 was all fire and chemistry. It felt intoxicating, like finally being seen. But it wasn't love. It was emotional whiplash. The highs were addictive, the lows were destabilizing, and I kept convincing myself that if I could be better, calmer, more lovable, he'd finally stay in the highs instead of dipping into the lows. Instead, he drifted away, and when that marriage ended, it didn't just feel like heartbreak. It felt like confirmation of a belief I'd carried since childhood. I wasn't worth staying for. By marriage number 3, I was exhausted, so I went for practical. Someone who wanted stability and a predictable life. We planned well, we functioned well, but we weren't truly connected. We were 2 people hoping a checklist could stand in for actual intimacy. It worked for a while until it didn't. And when that marriage fell apart, I couldn't pretend it was coincidence anymore. 3 different men, 3 different dynamics, but the same pattern underneath every one of them. The same fear running the show. The same wound calling the shots. It wasn't about choosing the wrong partners. It was about me showing up as someone who was desperate to be kept, instead of someone who felt whole and capable on her own. That was the moment I realized the person I'd been searching for in all those marriages wasn't out there. It was the version of me I'd been abandoning for decades. After my 3rd divorce, I did something I had somehow avoided my entire life. I stopped looking for someone to save me. No dating apps, no rebound fantasies, no desperate search for the next person who might finally make me feel secure. I sat with myself instead. It was uncomfortable and quiet in a way I wasn't used to. But in that silence, a thought surfaced that changed everything. What if I made the same promises to myself that I kept trying to make with other people? What if I became the partner I'd been searching for? So I created my own vows, real vows, based on the traditional ones I'd spoken 3 times to 3 different men. But this time, the commitment was to me. The first vow was for richer or poorer. It meant I stopped waiting for someone else to secure my financial life. I learned how to manage my money, how to plan, how to be responsible for my future, instead of hoping a partner would lift that burden. I became my own financial stability. The second vow was for better or worse. I stopped abandoning myself emotionally when things got hard. Instead of panicking during anxiety or sadness, I learned to sit with my own feelings without running to someone for validation or rescue. I became the steady presence I'd been trying to extract from others. The third vow was in sickness and in health. I stopped treating my body like something I could neglect until someone else cared about it. I took ownership of my physical well-being, rest, nourishment, movement, and compassion instead of criticism. The fourth vow was to have and to hold. This one went deeper than the rest. It meant I would not leave myself, even in my worst moments. Not when I was scared, not when I failed, not when I felt unworthy. I would stay. I would be present. I would be the person I could rely on, no matter what. These weren't affirmations I said once and forgot. They became a daily practice, an ongoing commitment to showing up for myself the way I'd always hoped someone else would. And when I started living by these vows, something inside me began to shift in ways I never expected. Once I made those vows to myself, things started to change. Not in a dramatic overnight transformation, but in slow, steady ways that added up. The first shift was internal. That hollow feeling I'd carried for as long as I could remember began to fade. I no longer felt like I was walking around half present, waiting for someone to show up and make me whole. I started to feel grounded in my own life, like I finally lived here instead of hovering on the sidelines. I also stopped making choices from fear. Before, every decision, jobs, relationships, even hobbies, was filtered through the question, will this make someone stay or make someone leave? Once I committed to myself, that question lost its power. I began choosing based on what actually mattered to me. I took career risks, set boundaries, said no to things that drained me, and yes to things I'd once been too scared to try. I trusted that even if I failed, I wouldn't abandon myself in the fallout. My relationships transformed too. When I eventually started dating again, I wasn't hunting for a savior or auditioning for worthiness. I was simply meeting people, curious to see if we connected. If something didn't work out, it stung, but it didn't destroy me. My wholeness wasn't on the line anymore. I already belonged to myself. Friendships got healthier, work got easier. I wasn't quietly begging for approval everywhere I went. I could actually show up for people without the constant fear of being rejected or replaced. I was bringing a complete person into every space, not a frightened half of one. The real turning point came one quiet night alone in my apartment. Nothing special was happening. Nothing impressive or dramatic. I was drinking tea, listening to music, and realized I felt completely at peace. Not because everything in my life was perfect, but because I finally trusted the person I was with, myself. For the first time, I understood that I had a family, me. That little girl who'd been dragged through 24 foster homes finally had what she'd wanted all along. Not a partner, not a parent, not a picture-perfect life, but someone who would stay. Someone who would not abandon her. Someone she could rely on. And that someone was me. A few months after making those vows to myself, I felt this urge to mark the moment, to give it a kind of ceremony, even if no one else would ever see it. So I drove to a mountaintop, one of those places where the world feels bigger than your problems and quieter than your thoughts. I stood there alone in the wind, and without planning to, I got down on one knee. It wasn't symbolic or dramatic for anyone else's benefit. It just felt like the right posture for what I needed to say. I whispered the words I had spent my whole life waiting to hear. I will never leave you. Not, I'll try. Not, I'll stay as long as it's easy. I will never leave you. When you fail, when you're terrified, when you feel broken or unlovable, I will be there. You will never wake up abandoned. Not by me. That moment on the mountaintop wasn't cute or performative. It was the realest vow I'd ever made. It was the day I finally came home to myself. So if you're listening to this and you recognize any part of yourself in my story, if you've spent years hoping someone else would choose you, save you, complete you, I want you to hear this clearly. You already have the person you're looking for. They've been with you through every heartbreak and every disappointment. They've survived everything you've survived. And they're still here. All that's left is for you to turn toward them, to kneel down in your own way and say the words you've been aching to hear. I choose you. I will never leave you. That scared child inside you, the one who's been waiting for someone to stay, will finally get to rest because they'll realize the person they needed was never out there somewhere. It was always you.